Okay, good morning. How you doing?
Good.
All right, so here to talk a little bit about the future of networks and where things are going to be going. And so first we got to kick it off with the safe harbor, which is actually a speed reading test, which ends right now. There'll be a test at the end of the conference. I hope you guys do well. So getting back onto the network, basically when we take a look at things, I don't think especially for the individuals in the room here, you need any introduction into who Verizon is, but I did want to lay out exactly the way we look at things as the company evolves in the service offerings. So down at the bottom, what you see are really the main pillars. So you've got wireless, you have the global broadband, and you have our Fios network. Those are really the big engines that drive a lot of the activity that's ongoing within the company today and will be ongoing into the future. But then sitting on top, if you take a look at, that's a different kind of a layer, different plane than we have. And there you have things like interactive media, digital entertainment, think about video offerings, content ingestion, distribution, all new areas of the business within Verizon. Internet of Things, which you just heard about, Chris gave a great talk on that. And also internet services, think like commerce, analytics, advertising, et cetera. Now the interesting thing about taking a look at these is that they're really two different planes, right? If you think about some of the challenges that we have as a company and as an industry is that you've got these networks that are handling all the traffic that needs to get from point A to point B. And then you also have all these services sitting on top that need to change dynamically. And the issue that we're running into and the challenge is that those timeframes are not aligned. So you think about the rate and pace that things need to change at the services layer, it's really about app pace, web pace. And down below, you've got the network layer, which typically takes much longer. So that's the area that we're focused on within Verizon, and that's the area that I think as an industry we need to focus on as well to make sure that these discontinuities that we have from timing are brought in line so that we're aligning the network services with those applications that sit on top. So when you talk about the network, one of the great stories that we have is that there's tremendous. So I wanted to give you just a quick view into where things look from a network standpoint, both on wireless, global, and over on the Fios side. So on the wireless side, really healthy triple-digit growth on our LTE network year over year, which is a great story. Healthy double-digit growth on the global and on the Fios network as well, which again is all a great story. But one of the challenges that we have is that we don't have revenue streams that are aligned with those growth trends. So what we're left with is essentially a network that really isn't innovating at the rate that we need to make sure that we can handle some of the growth that we have for the traffic that's sitting on these networks. And that's really the big challenge that's sitting in front of us. So when you take a look at the things that we're doing within the company today, on the wireless side, a number of major advances. So we've talked about many of these, LTE advanced, LTE unlicensed, 5G eventually. And while this is going to give you increased performance, this is really about capacity, making sure that we can have enough capacity on the network to handle all the additional data coming across, including things like machine to machine. And you'll see us make more announcements around this on things like SON, vRAN, et cetera. This is all going to continue to accelerate on the wireless side. And then if you take a look over on the global side and on Fios, same effort, whether you're talking about GPON, ROADMs, whatever it may be, a constant race to try and increase the overall capacity and make sure we're delivering at speeds that are equivalent to what those services need on that higher plane that I talked about in the previous slide. And so these are all things that we're doing within the network today. But the interesting thing that we're taking a look at, and this is why it's a critical transition for us, is that underlying all this is really software. And when you think about the way networks are built and maintained today, it's primarily a hardware game. And so when we take a look at it within Verizon and we think about how do we align those two planes that I talked about before, where you've got that network plane, you have that services plane, we've really got to figure out how do we get into more of a software mode as we bring on new services onto the network. And that's where I'm going to spend the majority of my talk here today. So within the network, I talked about some of the revenue challenges. So it's not surprising, one of the things that I'm laying out here is that we need to make sure that we have new sources of revenue coming online within the network. And so for a lot of us, this is about service chaining. Getting boxes out into the network, white boxes, if you will, that we can quickly put services on that either we control or the customer controls. Could be security services, could be any number of services. But again, the important thing here is that they're chained together, they're dynamic, they're programmable. It's not necessarily requiring a brand new box, a brand new connection every single time we want to have something new put into the network. And then service velocity, that's really the other key component here, is that when you're trying to put something into the network, we've got to make sure that it's not something that takes months and in a worst case years. The kernel of an early idea can't result in a service offering 18 months or 2 years down the road. It really needs to happen in weeks and in worst case months. And then the last area is going to be resource management. So when we take a look at resource management, what are we really talking about there? That's really cost per bit, right? So you have that massive growth that's going on in the network, which is great. But we don't necessarily have the same alignment on the cost side to try and combat that. So one of the things that we're taking a hard look at, and one of the things we're going to be driving within Verizon, is that we've got to make sure that we're changing the trajectory for the cost on a per bit basis. And again, from our vantage point, we believe that that comes into moving to commoditized hardware and moving the solutions into software. And that's where our focal point is going to be. I wanted to give you one other area before we jump into what the approach is within Verizon and what we think the approach needs to be for the industry. So these are just some of the stats that we have ongoing within the network here today and some of the challenges that we have. So over on the left-hand side, you see OTT variability, and you see some charts here. It's basically data that sits on the network. But the interesting thing that you see here is that blue line on the top. This is a major spike that we had in the network from the OTT community. Could be a number of apps that are out there, and it's HTTPS traffic. Right? We had to build the network to make sure that it could handle those kind of spikes relative to the norms that are coming across. And then if you look over on the right-hand side, that's actually a Verizon product. So that's a product that has seasonal variability. So in this instance that I'm laying out here, we're showing higher peaks in the holiday season versus what you would normally see. And that delta is roughly 70%. Now the way we could handle this traditionally is that we would build the box's connectivity in advance to make sure that you don't have any service interruptions that come across as a result of these spikes. And that's certainly worked well up till today, but I think the better way to handle it is to create a more dynamic environment where we have the ability to flex and scale the network as a function of individual network services that need to come online at sometimes rapid speeds. And that's where the network needs to change for us. And then the layer down the bottom, that's really IoT. So again, great talk about machine to machine. And one of the things that's critical here is that it's different kind of traffic. If you think about the vast majority of the machine-to-machine devices that are out there, very small payload, lots of control plane, different kind of offering on the network. And if you think about the way the networks are built today, it's really one network. And that network serves devices the same way, whether you're a smart meter or you're a smartphone. And if you think about where this is going to be going in the future and the fact that we're going to have tens of millions of machine-to-machine devices coming online with a higher probability of more control plane traffic and probably less on the payload side or the bearer side, you've got to be more dynamic and think about where the network needs to go as far as shifting and changing the needs and dynamically moving it across the network. So when we take a look at all these changes, you've got massive growth that's going on. You've got new expectations on the network. What are the new revenue streams that are coming across? What's the new velocity that we're going to have? How do we lower the cost per bit? And then you have all these day-to-day challenges, and you think about this major shift that we all need to make within Verizon, and again, across the entire industry. And the way we think about it is that this is very much like changing the engine mid-flight. We've got to make sure that we can maintain all the growth, all the variability that's ongoing, all the new services that are required, but then we also have to make a major shift in the way we architect the networks. And so this is the approach that Verizon's taking. So what we're looking to do is that we have a broad-based program, company-wide, taking a look at all the existing assets that are in the ground today. So as we make this shift over to software-first approach, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we take advantage of the assets that are sitting in the ground today. So we as Verizon, we as many carriers, we as an industry, there's billions of dollars sitting in the ground today. We simply can't go out and swap all that out because we think software is going to solve all the immediate issues we have now and in the future. So you've got to create something where you can have a specific surgical function. You can go in and say, we're going to pick certain functions in the network and make decisions about how we're going to change things. So for us, we're going to go ahead and automate existing hardware that's sitting in place. So creating an orchestration layer that sits on top of Verizon that allows us to automate what were largely manual processes in the past. And so taking advantage of the hardware that's currently in there, but changing the way we do business, making it more dynamic. And then we're also going to be running in parallel an effort to obviously virtualize. That's the key for us. We've got to make sure that as we move into this software-centric, software-first mode, that we're moving towards a process where as new functions need to come online or as we're making shifts in the industry, we're going to go ahead and virtualize it first. And then also running alongside of that is an effort, and this is really the end goal, is to get to software-defined networking. This is where we work directly with the partners that we have in place today and new partners and figure out how do we decompose the network functions that are in place today and create a far more dynamic service offering that's going to meet the needs and again operate at that same pace that I was talking about in the beginning at that services plane. And when we take a look at each one of these options, these are all real options that we're driving right now within Verizon. We take a look at areas where we think we need to have more dynamic service offerings, where we need greater reliability and less human intervention, where there's capital intensity. So if we're thinking about where we're spending the money today within Verizon, we're thinking about these are the areas that we need to target to get them virtualized and moved into an SDN environment. So for us, it's from the core data center all the way out to the edge and everything that sits in between. And then the last area is going to be lifecycle management. If we have functions that are sitting in the network today that are end of life, and there's an option to go to the next generation of card, we're going to not go to that next generation of card if we can avoid it. We're going to go ahead and virtualize that because that's the right move for the company. That's the right move for the customers that are leveraging our services. And we believe that's the right move for the entire industry. So our overall approach, we announced back in April that we're making this big push into software-defined networking. So we knew right out of the gate that Verizon has tremendous partners and we can't go it alone. So we went right out and talked to each one of our key partners on the infrastructure side within network, and we said, look, we're all going to make this shift over to software-defined networking. We're all going to be virtualize everything. Let's make sure we're building this together. So we had an announcement that came out with Alcatel-Lucent, Cisco, Ericsson, Juniper, and Nokia, and we are all co-architecting the next generation of the network within Verizon. And the overall approach that we have is to make sure that, again, it's a software-first model. And something that progresses, leveraging the existing assets that we have today, virtualizing where we can, and then eventually getting to that fully software-defined network. And the mode that we're going to take is going to be standards-based. So you see OpenStack referenced there. So we're looking to bring in an OpenStack environment that's going to scale not only within Verizon, but with other carriers because all of those partners obviously sell to other carriers. We're taking a hard look at things like the Open Compute project. So our view is that in the future, the carriers should really be responsible for building out the compute, the storage, the networking, the forwarding, and that's all going to be leveraged and utilized across all the functions that are coming on board as software from each one of the partners. That's going to give us the kind of flexibility that we need in order to be effective in the marketplace. And then in particular for Verizon, we've also made a move to combine this whole effort across wireless, wireline, and IT, which is critical. So we had a move recently, organization where Roger Gurnani has now taken over as the chief technical architect within Verizon. So he has now the CTO and the CIO functions. And so we're bringing together everything within Verizon and also learning from some of the early efforts that we've had within IT. If you take a look at our back office operations within Verizon today on the IT side, it's over 70% virtualized. So we're taking those teams, integrating them directly in with the network organizations, and rebuilding and redesigning exactly the way we think the network functions need to operate in the future. And so the key for us is really building out the next generation of network that operates at the pace of software, not hardware. And that's where we think we need to go, and that's where we think the industry needs to go. So what do we think the key benefits are? So just to touch on it briefly, if you think about today's networks, right, we're all very familiar with the way it works. You've got change windows. Those change windows are built for the hardy engineers that like to stay up between 2 and 6 o'clock in the morning, make those changes. They've all got to be scheduled, and it all takes significant time. You have firewall experts, router experts, et cetera, and they all need to coordinate this and orchestrate it. The new world needs to be a 24/7. You need to have the ability to go in and make changes as needed the way the web and the application domains operate today. We need to function that exact same way. And the way that operates is through things like automation, analytics, and micro releases. So we've got to make sure that we've got a fully automated, essentially a software function that allows us to make changes in the network without a lot of manual intervention. We need analytics coming back up from the forwarding plane and other aspects of the network that tells us whether or not things are good to go or we need to pull it back. And we've got to make sure that those functions we're decomposing are decomposed in a way that allows us to not do major releases from the kernel all the way up, but really micro releases for the services that are important to either fix something or get a new enhancement onto a particular product or service. These are the things that we have to have. And then the key one down in the bottom right-hand corner, as I alluded to before, is really about shared services. So decomposing the network so that we have essentially a pool of hardware that's available. That pool of hardware can be leveraged by any of the new applications that are coming on board, and it's all shared. So we eliminate all the silos that you have between organizations, between network functions. It all becomes a shared community that we can leverage within a network to dynamically provide offerings when and where we need. So when we made the announcement back in April about partnering, we said that we weren't announcing any services, but we would be coming out with some in a not too distant future. So I wanted to announce one of them that we're going to be rolling out within Verizon. So something called Mobile Private Network, and it's back to machine again. So we're virtualizing this platform. It's a big platform for us. We have over 12 million mainly machine-to-machine devices that are sitting on there today. It's a high growth platform. 2013 to 2014, we had roughly 170% growth, which is great. It's a very simple concept. Essentially, we take the devices that are sitting on the Verizon network, we pump the private IPs from the enterprise and bring all that data back into the enterprise so they have ultimate control over exactly what happens with those solutions. So it's a great offering. But one of the challenges that we've had is that it takes a long time to set up an enterprise customer. And as you indicate, it's indicated on the slide here, it's weeks. And the reason why it's weeks is because people come in, you have a sales engineer, they collect information, it generates tickets, it goes to the router group, the firewall group, the network function group, they go into the change windows, they make the changes. If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, back it out, reschedule it. It takes a lot of time. So the solution that we have right now allows for that to happen in less than a day, and really it's minutes, because it's about collecting that information, validating it, launching the software function that initiates those changes on the firewall, on the router, on the network function, setting up the contacts, and then the customer is up and running. So it's a major shift. And this is really where we need to be as an industry for all the functions and services. And this is certainly where Verizon's going. And so the last thing I want to leave you with, because a lot of times when we talk about new technical capabilities that are coming online, we spend a lot of time talking about the speeds and feeds and other things that we think are critical to that new shift, which is great and it's critically important, but we don't spend enough time talking about the culture. And for Verizon, we recognize that this is going to be a broad-based, company-wide shift that we have to take on, and we believe this is a broad-based, industry-wide shift that we need to take on as well, which is why we brought some of the key partners in, and we're working with additional partners as well on this shift. And so for us, what we talk about within Verizon is that we're going to be re-envisioning what the network needs to be in direct collaboration with our partners and the industry. We're going to go ahead and retool, so brand new tool chains, tool sets coming in to redefine how we manage a network, and we're going to retrain the staff. So we have over 170,000 employees within Verizon. We think they're some of the best support engineers that are out there in place today, and we're going to retrain them and make sure that they're ready for the shift to move into software. And so when we think about this big shift, we think about it's software, it's the management technologies, it's the network, and it's all the processes. It's everything in between. And you've got to make sure that the company is ready to make this transition because it's a major one. And you also have to make sure that all the partners in the industry is ready to make this shift as well, because again, it's a big deal for everybody, and we recognize this. So we're going to have a major focus within our company and with our partners to make sure that we're making this transition together. And so for us, what I'll leave you with is that, massive growth, massive opportunity. We think we're in a transitional phase within Verizon. We know that this is the right kind of shift to make. We're separating out the software from the hardware, and we're excited about the opportunities we're going to have ongoing within Verizon. But I think the thing we want to leave you with is that this has to be industry-wide. It can't just be something that Verizon's pushing. It's got to be all the carriers, all the partners, the entire industry. If we make this kind of shift together, then we could bring together those two planes that I talked about before, where the apps and services and the network are operating at the same rate and pace and bringing the right kinds of services to the marketplace. Thank you.